how does the top cop in the land, Congressman Steube, not know about violent environmental extremists forcing their way into a federal building in Washington, D.C.? You're the top cop, topper prosecutor. You're the AG for this country. I don't understand that. Greg, can you explain?
Just like I said in the hearing, it blows my mind that the Attorney General of the United States would not know of an incident that just occurred weeks before he testified in our hearing in a federal building right here in Washington, D.C., blocks from his office, where 55 people were arrested. 55 people were arrested. A whole bunch of people got away. Officers were injured. People were taken, officers and security guards were taken to hospitals, and he has no idea. So either he's outright lying to the American people, or they are so disinterested in anything but going after conservatives or people with Trump or MAGA hats on that they just ignore other information that's happening all across the country. I mean, we saw it happening this past summer with all the riots across the country, attacking federal buildings night after night after night. Where is the SWAT teams raiding those people's houses?
Right. Where's the letters to the FBI for that? Oh, no, we got time to write a letter about concerned parents who were going to bitch about CRT. Thank goodness I'm one of those parents. Cuff me and stuff me there, AG. We got time to write a letter to the FBI and go after parents that are concerned about vaxes and masks and CRT, but we won't go after BLM and Antifa for what they did for nearly a year and a half, tearing cities apart across this country. This DOJ is so politicized, and for him to sit there and tell you and the other members of Congress, the American people, that he will, and you guys heard it right in the soundbite we played, we don't care what political affiliation, we go after anyone that's breaking the law, blah, 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 blah. That's a bold-faced lie to the American people.
And you know just as well as I do that if those people that forced their way into the Department of Interior would have had on MAGA hats or hats or would have been flying American flags and don't tread on me flags, that every one of them would be in jail right now in solitary confinement without bail or any of these things, the same way that they've treated the January 6th protesters. And the mere fact that he wasn't willing, I pressed him further in that hearing and I said, here's two pictures, exact same activity.
Oh, I love those pics.
Call them domestic terrorists too, and he refused to do that.
Yeah.
He had a chance for the American people to say, oh, no, despite ideology, we're going to treat them the same, and he absolutely refused to do it.
They should be labeled domestic terrorists. That's what you're labeling anyone that they're labeling domestic terrorists and insurrectionists of folks who were just on the steps on January 6th that didn't even enter the building, that did nothing hostile or violent. They're calling them all insurrectionists, and so is the mainstream, lamestream, lapdog media. And that's what kills me is, Greg, until I was watching the hearing and you held those pics up and brought it up, and I think I'm pretty informed, I didn't even know about that insurrection at the Interior Department back on October, whatever it was. I didn't know about it. The mainstream media literally buried this from getting out of D.C. I guarantee the folks watching right now are like, I had no clue any of that happened. They kept it because they know it would blow the narrative out of the water because you're not saying they're the exact same as January 6th. They covered this up.
Article that was on Fox, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, not one of them talked about the very similar activities by people in our country forcing their way into a federal building. And so the American people just didn't even know about it, to then show the hypocrisy of how politicized the Department of Justice and our administration under the Biden administration has gotten.
It's disgusting, Greg. Let's talk about the other big subject of that hearing that day. You were going after him on January 6th comparisons. The other big one, of course, was him politicizing and weaponizing, now using the FBI to go after concerned parents, now calling them domestic terrorists. And let's go back to where it all began. The biggest teachers union out there, the NSBA, sends that letter to the White House calling parents like me domestic terrorists for going to meetings. The White House then gets the AG to write that famous letter we now know that says we're not going to stand for and want the FBI to look into anyone that is, quote, I believe they used harassment or intimidation. Then they said violence. Of course, if you're being violent at a school board meeting, your butt needs to go to jail. But harassment or intimidation, well, that's in the eye of the beholder. You could say Dan went to the meeting and raised his voice and directed it at the president of the board. He's intimidating him, and now the FBI is going to come for me. So what did you make of the fact that the NSBA over the weekend just issued an apology letter apologizing to calling parents, there it is, domestic terrorists? Yet I hear nothing from the White House or the AG saying they're sorry and they're going to rescind this new policy. Your take?
Yeah, Yeah, that's the first question that all of the Republican members of the Judiciary Committee have. Are you going to rescind your letter, Attorney General of the United States, as it relates to weaponizing the FBI to investigate these alleged domestic terrorists who are parents who care more about their children than this garbage they're being taught on CRT all across our country? So, of course, they're not going to answer that. And it's kind of interesting that 5 days after that letter was written to the White House, 5 days later, the Attorney General sent that then memo to the FBI instructing them to investigate these individuals. There's no coincidence. And in that hearing, Jim Jordan and others pressed AG Garland on, did he have communications with the White House? Did people at the DOJ have communications with the White House to politicize this memo? And he refused to say if there were other people in the DOJ that had had communication with the White House about that. But you know as well as I do that 5 days later, suddenly a memo comes out. There was communication that was happening between the White House and the school boards as it relates to the DOJ pushing that memo out, weaponizing the FBI.
Yeah, I saw him dance around. He was dancing around everything. I mean, when Matt Gaetz was taken to task on who he hires and makes associate prosecutors, because we learned in that hearing, which I didn't even realize, there's no rule against it, you can have lobbyists and guys that used to work on federal campaigns for office, then that maybe they had a law background, go become a prosecutor at the DOJ. I'm sure there's no political bias then when they're deciding which cases to prosecute and which ones not to, if they just got done working for the frickin' Biden campaign a year ago. I mean, come on.
Yeah, we've had a weaponized DOJ all during the Trump administration. Remember, these are the same people who use the FBI to investigate and use the FISA court to get warrants to spy on citizens of our country. All of these things happen under the DOJ, and now with Biden in the White House, they're just further emboldened to push this left-wing socialized agenda to come down on the American people. And I tell you, the American people are smart enough to know that this type of activity is going on and can see through it. And that's why Democrats are so worried about these elections like in Virginia that's happening and otherwise, because Americans are sick and tired of the government intruding on their lives, like telling them what their kids can be taught and all these different issues that the DOJ is using.
Well, and to your point right there, CRT is the #1 in kids education that is now really heating up that Virginia gubernatorial race you're talking about. Youngkin, now they're in a dead heat, McAuliffe and Youngkin. And if you go back to the day before McAuliffe made that comment about parents shouldn't decide what the kids are being taught, the school boards should, the schools should, he dropped. He was up, 5, 6, 7 points, and now they're in a dead heat. Final question to you, nothing about the DOJ or any of that. I just want to switch gears real quick and get your take on what's going to happen eventually with this bloated spending bill, reconciliation, and infrastructure. We saw the president, excuse me, I don't say that. We saw Mr. Biden out there today in Jersey pitching it again, begging for whatever scraps he can get because you've got more Democrats now defecting in the Senate, it appears. This isn't looking good for old JoJo to get this passed, is it?
Well, there was an article that we know he had a meeting with Manchin to try to get Manchin on board with certain provisions that were just the infrastructure package, not the $3.5 trillion in spending they want to do, just the infrastructure package. But I think some of the concessions that he may make for Manchin, Sinema and other senators may not like it. The Pelosi was quoted as saying that by the end of this week, there would be something that we would be voting on the House, but they've also been saying that since February of this past year.
Right.
So I'm not holding my breath, thankfully, that they're going to be able to get something through the House. I hope not, because it's not the policy that we should be having in Washington today, is spending more money. After spending $11 trillion in the last 18 months, that's the last thing we should be doing.
Exactly. Florida Congressman, representing 17th down there, Greg Steube, thank you so much as always coming on the program. Take care of yourself.